Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Treasury Strategies State of the Profession message for 2012. I'm Kathy Gregg, partner and co-founder of Treasury Strategies, and this is where we take time early every year to consider the major issues treasurers are most likely to wrestle with in the coming 12 months. Last year, we talked about facing the elephants in the room, which we said were very low interest rates and low inflation. And we said treasurers needed to be proactively prepared for abrupt changes in these items. Well, we didn't see big rate moves last year, but it's certainly been good to be proactively prepared as we've dealt with financial fallout from all sorts of things. We had a Japanese tsunami. We had the U.S. debt ceiling showdown and debt downgrade. We have had a string of Eurozone bailouts, and we're still grappling with the ongoing Greek issue and its ramifications for the European Union and the Euro, and several other minor catastrophes that I've blessedly forgotten about at this point. So as we turn the calendar page to 2012, our State of the Profession focus is, are we there yet? Which is the universal question from a restless 5-year-old in the back seat of the car on a long journey who wants to know, when is this tedious trip going to be over? So when are things going to settle down? When will we get back to business as usual? At one level, from observing what's going on in the marketplace, our answer is, it really doesn't seem to matter. And that's because in the midst of all of this challenge and turmoil and upheaval, companies are figuring out how to operate and succeed right where we're at. They're hedging their bets, literally and figuratively. They're guarding their working capital and liquidity. They're examining unthinkable risk scenarios and planning through them. And they're relentlessly improving their analytic capabilities with better technology, more automation, and getting their hands around big data. It's as if we now live on a very high mountain and the atmosphere doesn't have as much oxygen as it used to, but we've acclimated and we're breathing just fine. So whether or not the overall economy ever gets there or not, this is actually still a pretty interesting question for one's own treasury. My colleagues, my 4 colleagues with me today, are going to discuss 4 are we there yet areas of particular significance for Treasury: regulation, risk, liquidity, and automation. Dave Robertson, head of the financial services practice, is going to lead us off with the regulatory angle. Dave, it's clear we're most decidedly not there yet on regulation. So what do you see as the likely regulatory impact for corporate treasury?
Thank you, Kathy. At the outset of the regulatory response to the financial crisis, Treasury Strategies characterized the government response as massive, intrusive, and global. And I'd love to say that we were wrong, but in fact, it does not look like we were exaggerating. When it comes to massive, we sort of illustrated that with a gorilla, and I think we've moved from a rampaging elephant to sort of a laconic gorilla. I don't know if that's progress, but the regulatory change has been massive in both scale and scope. It affects not only CEOs, shareholders, and banks, but also homeowners and corporate treasurers. And just take, for example, Dodd-Frank, which was 2,300 pages in length, or 35 times the length of Sarbanes-Oxley. And there were well over 200 rules to be written, yet only 80 of those rules are final. So we are definitely not there yet. And when it comes to intrusive, we have a picture of a passenger who's being screened at the airport. And obviously that can be quite intrusive. I think I've had experiences in the airport security line that I thought I'd only have with my wife. So I can only imagine how the bank executives must feel right now. And what do we mean by intrusive? I think what's really most striking is the move from regulatory frameworks to very prescriptive regulation that really reduces the autonomy of financial services executives. If we think, for example, about Basel III, it's incredibly prescriptive, particularly regarding liquidity and capital. And I think the biggest concern here in its intrusiveness is that regulation will replace risk management. In fact, the role of a bank's asset liability committee and the risk return judgment of the market is actually severely constrained by many of these regulations. We also see that fees are being set by government limits rather than market forces, for example, debit interchange. And as I'm going to discuss on the next slide, that actually can create some very unintended consequences. Lastly, the regulation is global, but one might argue, is it cooperative at a global level or is it competitive? Merkel and Sarzowski, for example, both want a financial transaction tax, but David Cameron of the UK is adamant that there will be no such tax in the UK unless it's globally consistent. He clearly does not want London to lose its competitive position as a financial center. And I think as the regulations unfold at a global level, we are going to see some regulatory regimes actually set their regulations with an eye toward being competitive globally. If we move ahead to the impacts, we see really two types of impact. The first is direct. And while these are still being understood, they're a bit easier to grapple with. We do believe that the global impact of this financial regulation will be in the tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. And what we've pictured here is Gulliver. Poor Gulliver, he's been brought down by a massive number of Lilliputians. And I think what we have here is not just a few regulations with a massive magnitude, but literally an overwhelming number of regulatory changes. So it's almost like a death by 1,000 cuts. And while the direct impacts can be significant, we believe the most serious impacts are going to be indirect. And here we have a picture of a butterfly. And what we're trying to illustrate here is that economic systems are not simply supply and demand curves. They're very complex networks. They're much like a weather system. And to borrow the analogy of a butterfly effect, there can be a modest change in the economics in one sector that can produce a massively larger impact elsewhere and at a later date. Tony Carfang, a partner with our firm, recently spoke before the U.S. Congress panel on the regulation and the complex impacts. Right now, the U.S. is entertaining the Volcker rule. At the same time, the government may be impairing or otherwise shutting down money market mutual funds. And all of these regulations raise the question, how are corporations going to efficiently and effectively hedge risk? How are they going to invest or borrow short term? And if we do shut down the mutual funds through onerous regulations, at what point are the banks going to charge negative interest rates to manage the massive influx of cash? So while the direct impacts may be more easily understood, the indirect impacts could be far more massive and have a far more negative and adverse impact on the market. So given all this uncertainty, what should you be doing? Treasury Strategies is advising its corporate and financial services clients to assess, prepare, and partner. In terms of assessing, it's critical that you define the landscape. And one of the things we recommend is really starting what's critical with your business. So for example, if you are a corporate treasurer, what are the most critical things you need from the financial system? It might be even intraday credit. It might be an easy and cheap way to execute payments. And then also catalog the key regulations that could directly or indirectly affect you or your key partners in providing those critical services. You must also assess the impact. So one thing that we see many of our clients doing is scenario planning, actually using a kind of game theory to find out what could be some of the outcomes of these regulations. So if I'm reliant on commercial paper as a short-term financing need, what could cause that market to be impaired or more costly? And then it's important to prioritize these risks, taking into consideration scenarios in which multiple risks present themselves simultaneously. It's also important to prepare. And when we think of preparation, I kind of harken back to the 1950s, 1940s when people were building bomb shelters. And hopefully our regulatory impacts won't be akin to a total meltdown of the economy. It's necessary to prepare by evaluating alternatives and risk mitigating approaches. Mike Money and Laurie are all going to give some examples of these strategies in their discussions. And we think it's critical that at this stage, given the dynamic level of change, you think outside the box. For example, if I'm a multinational corporation, I may want to be flexible in where I locate my centers, my staff, even my balance sheet, and my expenses. What if a key jurisdiction becomes unfriendly to my company to the point where I can't easily or safely do business? Could I re-architect my balance sheet, my cash flows, to direct them to the most stable and pro-growth regulatory regimes? Many businesses will do this over time, but the speed and the magnitude of how you can do this may end up being a critical factor in how competitive your business remains. Lastly, it's critical to partner. It's now more important than ever to talk to your key banking partners, your peers, and industry leaders. First of all, just by talking to multiple partners, you're going to get a broader viewpoint. But we also feel that there's an opportunity to collaborate and advocate for regulatory change that promotes growth and stability, and to speak out against those changes that will impair growth and stability. It's also very important to tighten your relationship with key providers and counterparties. The faster and more robustly you can share information among your partners, the more dynamically you can accelerate the identification of risks or disruptions and take mitigating actions to keep your business thriving. So while we clearly aren't there yet in terms of clarity, we do have to move forward, and we have to ensure we're best prepared for what are surely going to be significant and far-reaching changes.
Thank you, Dave. That leads us nicely into our next speaker's remarks. Mike Galanis, the head of our corporate practice, is going to consider risk. Mike, it seems like risk management has gone from something that was tidy and well understood to something in sort of shark-filled waters. How should treasurers be responding to that?
Well, thank you, Kathy. Yes, there in fact are many sharks swimming about, and it's important to think about some strategies to avoid being eaten. But before we go there, let's discuss the risk landscape. For the past several years, a variety of major global financial and economic risks have emerged. The governments and regulators have attempted to address these risks through band-aid fixes, often applied one at a time, one on top of the next. The underlying problems have now grown to a level where the band-aids are no longer big enough to do the trick. In 2012, organizations will face a variety of significant risks that need to be on our radar screens and factored into our risk management strategies. As you consider the major risk concerns we are likely to face in 2012, the primary issues include continued uncertainty in the Eurozone, increasing instability in the Middle East, economic concerns in China, and potential for future political gridlock in the U.S. As you examine each of these issues more closely, it's easy to see the impact that they present in the form of financial risks to our organizations. The economic woes in Europe have a direct and immediate impact to the volatility of currencies in the region. The impact of the European debt crisis has also brought into question the financial viability of key financial trading partners. The possibility of a euro breakup and the resulting redenomination of currencies has quickly moved from the realm of impossibility to a real scenario for consideration. In fact, a variety of breakup scenarios have now emerged: a single country breakup, a multi-country exit, or a possibility of full dissolution. Each has its own set of economic and financial consequences. The political unrest in Egypt, Libya, Iran, Jordan, and many other parts of the Middle East has also caused increased volatility in the form of oil prices. It's unclear to what degree this unrest will continue throughout 2012 and what the related long-term effects will be to oil and trade in the region. Oil prices directly impact the cost of services and products produced throughout the globe. Treasury will need to play an active role in the hedging of commodities impacted. China has long been a strong economic force in this global economy. However, this economic giant now faces financial pressures and a slowdown stemming from its own real estate bubble and rising debt levels. The government has attempted to address these issues through monetary policy. But China is also facing a major transition in its top political leadership. Given these changes, it remains unclear what new actions will be taken to manage these financial concerns in 2012. This represents a major risk to corporations that have invested millions on expansion within China. Similarly, risks are rising for those organizations that look to China for sourcing of their products and raw materials and rely on manufacturing within the region. As the economy within China falters, each of these areas may experience a ripple effect. These impacts will elevate the importance of having financial visibility within the region and sufficient coverage from key financial service providers. This will be essential to maintaining effective funding, liquidity management, and hedging activities in the region. The U.S. also faces political change and financial uncertainty in 2012. As this is an election year in the U.S., the political configuration will remain a question mark until November. Shortly after the 2012 elections, U.S. political leaders will face fiscal decisions to the tune of nearly $5 trillion. This is made up of Bush-era tax cuts, which are scheduled to expire late this year, and the impending enactment of automatic government spending cuts that will trigger next January. If the parties align, fiscal decisions will be made quickly and with little impact to financial markets. If parties are split, gridlock is likely to result, and U.S. markets and the dollar will face material volatility. We have helped many of our clients take proactive steps to create risk management strategies, policies, procedures, and technology platforms to manage currency exposures, interest rate risk, and counterparty risk under these volatile conditions. With some of our clients, we have helped create new regional treasury processes and structures for managing these emerging risks. For other clients, we've helped select new service providers, banking structures, and enhanced technology to bolster their treasury and risk management capabilities and increase their global visibility. Unfortunately, through our research and our experience, we have seen that many companies are still unprepared to manage these increasing risks. Each of these issues has elevated the importance of effective FX, interest rate, commodity, and counterparty risk management processes within our treasury functions. These threats are complex and global in nature. They present potential impact to our currency holdings, our cash positions, liquidity strategies, earnings, and overall economic condition. Accordingly, it is incumbent on treasurers and their financial service providers to take some very specific steps to prepare for those risks that I've described and other potential risks that may emerge in 2012 and beyond. The strategy that we have found most effective for our clients is to move Treasury to what we at Treasury Strategies refer to as a Treasury 3.0 environment. For corporations, this means developing an environment where Treasury is the financial nerve center for the organization. In this environment, Treasury will be an analytic and technology hub that provides end-to-end business intelligence and strategic advice to the company's board, business units, creditors, customers, suppliers, shareholders, rating agencies, and regulators. To manage risk effectively, Treasury needs to have real-time visibility of global currency and interest rate exposures, liquidity positions, and the ability to monitor funding flows with precision and accuracy. As you develop and implement changes in Treasury that move you closer to this goal of a Treasury 3.0 environment, you might wonder how you know if you are there yet. In simple terms, treasuries and treasurers are there when they have implemented fully integrated and effective technology, processes, banking structures, controls, and staffing that are guided by well-designed global policies. You are there when you are confident in answering questions posed to you by your board of directors, such as, what have we done to prepare for the possibility of a euro breakup? What impact will there be to our business if oil prices increase by 50% this year? Should we move toward opening a new facility in Beijing in 2012? Are we prepared for post-election gridlock in the U.S. in 2012? For financial service providers, this means developing an array of unique and effective products and services and new methods for effectively integrating their systems and information with key corporate treasury processes. In this way, financial service providers can become an important partner for Treasury as they move towards their mission-critical goal of becoming the financial nerve center for the organization. By developing and supporting products and services that provide enhanced global visibility, real-time access to global cash and liquidity, and technology to mitigate the various existing and emerging threats facing their clients, financial service providers will differentiate themselves from their competition and forge even stronger relationships with their corporate clients. Only by having in place the necessary framework for detecting, monitoring, and managing enterprise-wide risks of this nature will we be able to compete in this ever-changing, unforgiving global environment.
Thank you, Mike. Now for our third topic, let's go to London with Moni Lindsay, who runs our London office. She's going to discuss liquidity. Moni, these regulatory and risk issues that Dave and Mike have talked about seem pretty staggering. What is the impact on liquidity? What else should treasurers be doing that they aren't already, and how can their providers help them?
Kathy, as I address your question, there are really three things that I want to cover. First, what are the key liquidity lessons from 2008 that are more relevant than ever today? Second, what are the challenges that remain or are emerging as we enter into 2012? And third, what are we advising our clients to do to navigate these changes? Looking first at the lessons from 2008 that are still very relevant today, the first is sources of liquidity. And the lesson there is to ensure you have adequate access to liquidity. And externally, don't depend on a single provider. Immediately following September 2008, companies caught with too few sources of liquidity were in a mad scramble to add banks. Now, this has been more measured in the last few years as companies have both deployed integrated banking networks while also maximizing access to liquidity. Internally, if prior to the crisis there were companies not focused on optimizing working capital in order to get access to internal liquidity, you would be hard-pressed to find one today. And it's not that beforehand they didn't think it was important, it's just that external credit was relatively more easy to get and more urgent initiatives took precedence. Initiatives focused on internal liquidity quickly turned into most important and most urgent on the list of initiatives. That this is a lesson very much taken to heart by our corporate clients is evidenced by the centralization initiatives we see, such as payments factories and shared service centers. And expanding Treasury's scope of influence, very much aligned with the Treasury as a nerve center, which Mike discussed. Treasury finds itself leading cross-functional collaboration across every department that impacts efficient working capital. So whether it's Treasury, purchasing, payables, sales, credit, receivables, marketing, business units, Treasury is involved. Visibility. Now, Mike talked about how critical visibility is for risk management, and it's absolutely just as important for liquidity. As our little guy here looking at his cash depicts, if you can't see the liquidity that you have, if it's not visible to you, then you can't get access to it, and it doesn't do you any good. In 2008, too many companies knew that they had liquidity sitting out there, but they had not prioritized their initiatives around technology, processes, and policies to optimize their access to internal liquidity. The 2008 crisis rocked many embedded assumptions around liquidity. Treasury learned that they needed considerably more rigor in the management of liquidity, whether sourcing or investing liquidity. And like our friend in this picture, who's being warned that his assets may be frozen, what looks like a safe and liquid haven for your cash may not prove to be so liquid. And the classic example of that was auction rate securities. Most companies listed these on their balance sheets as cash equivalents. only to find out they were holding long-term assets when the market for auction rate securities unraveled. So those are the lessons from 2008. So you might say, are we there yet? Well, hardly. Daunting and new liquidity challenges continue. Now, Dave covered regulation, and it has such a profound impact on liquidity, both the ability to optimally source and invest, that it bears repeating some of the key liquidity challenges that are resulting or will result. Basel III, while we don't know the extent of the impact on liquidity, nor exactly where it will land, hence uncertainty, there will most certainly be an impact around the amount of credit available, the pricing of that credit, the deposit products available, the kinds of deposits the banks will pay for, and the level of the deposits they'll want. And they may not always want your money. And they, as we have seen, may also charge you for leaving it with them. And there are other potential impacts to the ability to source and invest liquidity. Dave talked about the potential elimination or severe impact on money market mutual funds as a liquid alternative for operating cash. The elimination of money market mutual funds will also greatly diminish commercial paper as a source of borrowing. And the Volcker rule has the potential to wipe out or greatly diminish markets for some sovereign debt. The market for UK gilts, which has already had one large investor pull out due to complexity and uncertainty around regulatory requirements. High corporate cash levels. Now, you might think this is a good thing and not a challenge, but any treasurer finding him or herself sitting on more cash than they've ever had will tell you it is a challenge. Whether you label it hoarding or not, and we do not believe it's hoarding, as you can see from this chart, cash levels are at an all-time high. In addition to maintaining liquidity sufficient to support operating needs, capital expenditures, and acquisitions, corporates are also prudently building liquidity buffers in anticipation of another crisis and the great uncertainty. They don't want to be caught as they were in September 2008 again. The fact is, treasurers are faced with managing levels of cash they never expected to manage and are having to ask themselves a number of questions. Do I have the right liquidity structures, technology, and processes in place to manage this level of liquidity? And how do I explain these higher levels to shareholders and the public? And do I begin to consider a different capital structure? And how much is enough? How much is enough to weather the unknown storms? And at what point do I buy back stock or dividend some of it to shareholders or more aggressively look for the right acquisitions? Cash has changed and is changing. It's not as fungible as it was pre-crisis, when you could pretty much move cash around the world if you had too much in one region and needed it in another. And as Dave pointed out, there are local regulations and scenarios where the management of cash becomes increasingly more local than more global. So what are we recommending for our clients? Well, at the corporate level, it's to employ greater rigor. And what do we mean by rigor? Employ greater rigor and thoroughness and analysis of current and projected liquidity. For example, look at all the market mechanisms that have to liquidate an instrument before placing cash in that instrument. Look under every rock, as our friend here is doing. Run more scenarios in your forecasting process and determine what will be required to weather each and what that means for your external and internal liquidity sources. Employ greater rigor in creating your funding base, your credit providers, the degree of commitment to credit that they have, and what are your alternative sources? What's your emergency plan? Corporates also have to navigate. They need to make sure they've deployed optimal liquidity structures, policies, and processes to manage the higher levels of liquidity and navigate the reality of uncertainty and volatility in the market. For our providers, recognize that the data you have and the associated data architecture and the solutions are more integral than ever to the treasurer's ability to successfully navigate and execute liquidity strategies. Leverage the tremendous power of the data in your systems to deliver critical insights to key corporate liquidity decision makers. Ensure you're more flexible, faster to market, more deeply integrated with clients and partners. Deliver more advice around liquidity, how to gain access and visibility. And determine where and how you can provide liquidity and ensure you're paid for that liquidity and can sustain your commitments throughout the crisis so that you are a true relationship bank. We're not there yet if being there means certainty and lack of volatility when managing liquidity. However, we are getting there, and our understanding of what we need to do to manage and navigate the uncharted waters we find ourselves in.
Thank you, Moni. Thoughtful and challenging. And now we turn to our fourth and final speaker, Laurie McCully, who is the head of our technology practice. Laurie, in this technology area, seems to be characterized by nonstop change and evolution. What's next for Treasury? What's the there that we're trying to get to?
Kathy, there are really 3 signposts that will feature as part of the journey. The first makes the trip more exciting for some and scary for others. And that first one is that Treasury is assuming more control of risk management activities. As Mike mentioned in his expanding the corporate environment that people are facing, and that is the financial nerve center. In keeping with that concept, Treasury's taking on added responsibilities. Those added responsibilities now are corporate clients where we're seeing Treasury assuming control of commodity hedging. Their derivative portfolio at present consists of managing FX exposure, interest rate exposure, so it only makes sense that Treasury now takes control of hedging commodity exposure. And in order to do that, they need a technology platform to support that increased scope. We really feel that our clients coming out of 2008 needed to make a transition from monitoring risk to now mitigating risk. And what I mean by that is the extent to which we are helping our corporate clients more comprehensively assess counterparty risk is turning now to a situation where we're assisting clients on how to mitigate that counterparty risk that they now have a better view of. In order to do that, the functions relating to that require systems that can support those activities. They range from exposure gathering on FX, portfolio analytics across the entire portfolio, collateral management for that risk mitigation, and hedge accounting compliance. This is even more urgent as companies face greater regulatory burdens for derivatives. These are really the alligators lurking along the trip that don't have their mouths open yet, but they're waiting. The second, Kathy, is that data integration continues to be an issue. But in this case, we're almost there. The Wall Street Journal recently referred to big data. And in that context, they're talking about the extremely large data sets that users need to reach conclusions. That's long been the case in academic circles and in some particular industries. But really now, for our financial institution clients, the requirement is to make more proactive use of the data for their own regulatory compliance and really make it available to customers for risk management purposes and liquidity purposes, as Moni mentioned. For Treasury, the amount of data required continues to grow. That data is in a variety of places, as evidenced by the struggles that many of our clients have with respect to gathering FX exposures in a timely manner. And that data is needed in real time now for Treasury to effectively monitor counterparty risk and mitigate it, and get a visible view of their liquidity. As we work with our vendor clients, we see all Treasury technology systems are getting better at delivering on the concept of data integration. They're harnessing the data through interfaces and better user front ends like forecast entry. This includes really the ERP Treasury modules such as SAP Treasury and best-of-breed Treasury management systems. They're all doing a lot in this respect. Very true of our bank client web platforms as well. Everyone, we think, is doing a better job of data integration, but there's further to go. A great example of the data integration comes with Swift bank connectivity. That's really a perfect example of a streamlined integration solution. And we're seeing that the providers in the marketplace are offering our corporate clients lots of options about how to connect to Swift and what they can do with it in terms of exchanging messages and information with their financial counterparties. The third signpost along the way is that of a flexible IT environment. That's essential to support the activities that Treasury is now charged with. And we see that flexibility emerging in two ways, really how the systems are deployed and the options for accessing the platform. Treasury is short IT resources and looking to the cloud. In our tech projects during 2011, many clients elected to have their Treasury technology hosted outside their company, or they subscribed to software as a service platform. A nice, flexible way that doesn't require that many IT resources. This is what Treasury is seeking to a greater extent. Another element of the flexible IT environment is one that's developing, and we see it probably increasing to a strong need in the near future. That's mobile delivery for Treasury applications. Banks have been leading the way, and Treasury management system solution providers are adding mobile apps to their product roadmaps. This will help Treasury senior management as well as operational staff increase the ability to disseminate information and action the operational activities such as payments and viewing reporting. All of this, both the movement to the cloud and the ability to access information in a variety of ways, reflects the broader corporate trend toward the cloud, but we think it also shows just how IT constrained many of our clients' Treasury departments are. So in the final analysis, the journey continues, we think, from a Treasury technology standpoint. It's a continuous journey in which vendors, banks, and corporations are all getting closer to their destination, and we see that destination as one in which Treasury has a broader scope of activities with respect to liquidity and risk, as my colleagues have mentioned, and that in turn requires technology that supports Treasury strategic activities directed at monitoring and mitigating risk with full access to organizational data related to liquidity positions, exposures, and the derivatives that hedge those exposures.
Thank you, Laurie. So now, having listened to these 4 different perspectives, can we answer the question, are we there yet? Well, even for a Treasury that has many Treasury 3.0 capabilities, it seems to me there's a lot to still work through. All this new regulation intended to diminish financial institution risk will find its way into the corporate world. We have to be on alert to figure out whether it creates challenges or opportunities and how to respond to those. Risk obviously continues as a focus area. The Treasury imperative is to assess risks with high potential impact, even though they may be lower probability, and develop creative ways to mitigate. So whether those are currency, redenomination, commodity, or liquidity risk, still work to do here. Treasury obviously has to keep a constant eye on liquidity planning and maximizing access to global cash. especially as the consequences of these new bank regulations on investments, deposits, lending, and market making become visible. The impacts, again, on corporate treasury should become more clear. We'll have to assess them. And there has to be continual investment in automation and data integration, so we're getting better analysis and getting those global answers more quickly. For banks and vendors who serve corporate treasury, the need is to match the pace and focus of their development efforts against Treasury's risk, liquidity, and information needs. So, as you go back to your offices and you're thinking about what we discussed, if there's some way here that your Treasury feels a bit vulnerable, if you think about these things and see added value to your company in getting your Treasury or your services closer to there, please call us or email us or send us a note or a question in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen using the question mark icon, because that's what we at Treasury Strategies do. We help corporate treasuries and the banks and vendors that serve them get there. I also want to let you know Treasury Strategies will be traveling in Europe and North America next month on a listening tour of corporate treasury. This is where we want to hear how you're weathering the storms, we want to hear about your thorniest challenges, and we want to see how you see Treasury is changing. So if you'd like to be involved in that, again, please drop us an email, send us a note in the bottom corner of your screen, or call us. And the email address you can use is here on the screen, info@treasurystrategies.com. I want to thank my 4 colleagues for their thought-provoking ideas for this coming year. All of us at Treasury Strategies wish you a prosperous and full year. We thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to talking with you individually.